All right. Hello, everyone. I realize some folks are probably still getting connected, so we'll give just another minute or two for folks to get into our webinar here. But thank you all for joining us. We're very excited tonight to have Rebecca Watson, author of Little Scratch, and Colin Barrett, author of Young Skins, to join us. I see we've got a couple people that are in the room now, so let's go ahead and get started. We're very excited here at Unabridged to have these guys join us virtually. We have had a lot of great buzz and a lot of interest in Little Scratches. Its paperback release was very recently. So we're excited to hear more about the book and to hear their conversation tonight. Rebecca is joining us from London, author of Little Scratch here, was named one of the Observer's 10 Best Novelists of 2021 and pretty recently shortlisted for the Desmond Elliott Prize. She's also had work published in the TLS, The Guardian, Granta, and elsewhere. And a couple years ago was shortlisted for the White Review Short Story Prize. And then also works part-time as assistant arts editor at Financial Times. And we're very excited about this book and very excited to have her with us tonight. To host our conversation is Colin Barrett, author of Young Skins. This book was also awarded the Rooney Prize, the Frank O'Connor International Short Story Prize, and the Guardian First Book Award. He's also had stories appear in Stinging Fly magazine, New Statesman, New Yorker, Harper's, and elsewhere. And we are just tickled that they are here with us tonight. Thank you all for joining us and for supporting these authors. In the email invite that you received were some links if you're interested in the books and want to purchase from Unabridged Bookstore. You just have to click there and we'll get them to you. As we go through the conversation tonight, if you have any questions that you want to share with either of them, there's a little button at the bottom of your screen that says Q&A. You're welcome to submit your questions there, and as we have time, we'll try to get to those. But to start us off, I think, Rebecca, if you're willing, could we hear a little bit of Little Scratch from you?
Absolutely, yeah. So what I'm going to do is read from basically the exact middle of the book, which is this lunch break scene. So just to quickly say, it's a kind of day in the life of an unnamed young woman from when she wakes up to when she falls asleep. Inside her head, no stopping. I've said that line quite a few times. And so the lunch break is, so she's just kind of gone and got some lackluster soup from the canteen in the office and gone back downstairs to try and find this place that she often sits and eats her boring lunch. And a colleague has just walked past as she's kind of settled down to eat her lunch and distracted her. Eye contact already made. Him, mouth open. Hello, haven't seen much of you, it's been a while. What have you read recently? Mind gone. Not a clear head, but a blank head, making me question my capacity to think at all, even though I know that questioning my capacity to think is thinking in itself, but a different sort and not a sort I'm interested in much. I know I was reading a book on the train this morning, and yet here I am searching desperately for any hint of a book I might have encountered. What have I read? I say, pensively, as if the choice is just too extravagant, and I merely want to select the right book for my shelf or to interest in, the shelf inside my head, I mean, so that I'm not just delivering any old thing, which will only make things worse, naturally, because my head is still blank and time for rumination is running out, only implying I'm thinking over what I say, so that now whatever I say should seem more intelligent. But I still see clearly the table in front of me, my legs underneath asking to be scratched, spoon still clean, phone flashing WhatsApps, green unbroken chats hiding the carefully chosen background of my phone. And I see him noticing too, looking without wanting to at my phone flickering, him to the phone and then to me, to the phone, me too to the phone, him to me, phone, me, him. And I now can't turn the phone over, letting the back face up, because he'll know that I know and that we both know. So I let it flicker, whilst I continue to think, still not in my head, seeing clearly what is in front and overhead, him standing, jutting out, signalling to those walking, light bulb blinking, that the nook behind the coffee station is in use. Signalling to those passing by, look in, look at the reddening girl sitting on the sofa, mouth shut. still me, looking out, locking eyes with the him who is now cocking his head. Unimpressed. Am I applying that to his face, or is he unimpressed? Legs warm. But now I see. I see white, blue lettering, an image, not my spoon and not my phone, although I can see that too. An emoji of a pig, which distracts me for a second, but no, I'm not letting this go. Yes, an image, a book. Yes, good, blue lettering. That's it. It's what I read last week. That'll do. He doesn't know the order when I read things. Hard something, hard castle? No, look, let's grab the title. You've got that. Me. Well, I guess it's funny how you can so easily forget what you've read recently, but I've, yes, it's a coming, read The Second Body. That's something. Not what I'd like to pick out for him. Have you heard of it? Quite interesting. To millennial, it won't please him. But as a book, he'll know I'm looking at butchers and meat, reading, engaging, and our existence on this planet. He's not interested. I can see him glossing over, and I realise as he says, "Oh, nice, must check it out," that it was only ever a polite question. I could have said anything. Well, not anything. If I had said cloud atlas, perhaps he might have wrinkled the bridge of his nose, but really I could have gone, he's gone, with anything. Slide phone, WhatsApp, my him, 2 ticks, still not read. Me. Why is it whenever anyone asks what I've read, I go completely blank? Gonna stop there.
Thank you for that, Rebecca, and thank you everyone out there for joining us virtually at the Unabridged Bookstore. And so Rebecca, we're here to talk about Little Scratch, and people who haven't read it might have got a little flavor there from your reading, but for the unprepared reader, or rather the reader prepared for a typical novel reading experience, when they open Little Scratch, they will find themselves confronted by a text, by language, scattering all over the page, every which way. Sometimes like just rattling around the page like ball bearings, at other times clumping up into something quite, almost impenetrable. And at other times it resolves into 2 parallel vertical columns. Sometimes those 2 columns correspond to each other, and sometimes they're cross purposes. And yet when you actually start reading, and I hope people get the sense when they were listening to you, it flows very intuitively. It's very immersive very quickly. For a novel that when you just look at it on the page, seems to be doing a lot, almost a daunting amount. But once you get into it, it becomes very intuitive and easy to read, and accessible is the word I would use for a book that looks so unconventional. So the first thing I wanted to ask you about that was really just, did you always conceive of the novel this way, with this form? Was the form, there from the start, along with the premise of the subject, or did it grow out of drafting and writing it? Because there's versions of this novel where it's told much more conventionally,
Mm-hmm.
So was it always like this from the start, or did this voice emerge gradually?
Yeah, it was kind of immediate, or at least my memory of it was immediate. I think because, the reason I always like to read that passage, because that's the kind of first thing that I wrote of the novel. And it came from this kind of pressure point question of immediacy, of like, how do you, that was probably like, 30 seconds of time. But within it, whilst it's going on, the narrator sees it as a kind of very hyper intense, sensitized situation, where the stakes are way higher than they actually are. And I was just really interested in how you make that immediacy, which is not actually that high stakes. How do you put the drama into that? And so the form kind of came from that question, and it came actually from like being asked that question myself I mean, it's the novel is fictional, but the kernel of the book does come from me, which is, you know, not a kind of interesting thing about me, but it was purely just like a colleague walking past at a lunch break and saying to me, like, what have you read recently? And not being able to answer the question and being like, fuck's sake. But then also just being like, how, like, what was that moment? I was, you know, because I often would write like during my lunch break. And so I'm very glad that he did. He walked past at a time when I was writing already. And so after he left, I was just like, how would you get that on the page that I would be able to explain what happened within that moment? And so, you know, it suddenly realized that the system of the page had to kind of relate to the time passing. So basically the first page I wrote was a kind of split, fragmented page where, you know, as you pass down the page, you pass through time.
Yeah, and I mean, it kind of related to that as well. I mean, my first impression looking at the book, just like skimming it, was like, it looks like a book of poems or poetry or something. And there's a key scene later on where we have a little walk, a cameo from the poet, which I won't spoil for anyone. And you know, and that there seemed also almost obviously a reflexive element, you know, the text commenting on itself as well when the poet appears. And you know, as I say, in a novel, you're getting, you know, your book made me think about the books I read every day, the novels I read every day, which is just uniform, more or less uniform blocks of linear, you know, of paragraphs. And like when you're reading, there's a very continuous rhythm, no matter how exciting or boring or whatever it is, the rhythm stays the same. Whereas with yours, with this, like in a poem, the interaction of the text and the white space between it causes you to, like, just encourages a rhythm. So it causes you to speed up and to slow down. And therefore in the reading, I think kind of feel exactly what the narrator's feeling when their mind is racing. The text almost just, you know, there's lots of space because it's just flying away. Away from you almost, and then when she's kind of mired in a thought, it gets very dense and thick, and you're suddenly wading through, you know, just paragraphless blocks. And I mean, and even just you reading it, like, are you happy to call it a novel? Is it also a poem? Is it a dramatic monologue? Because I think especially once you start reading it, again, it's just so much more, you know, it's really there.
Yeah.
You couldn't be all of those things at once, or did you even think about it?
I think that, like, to me it's a novel, but it's kind of like, I think a lot of people can't get over the affront of how it looks, and so, like, it's almost like calling it a novel just seems like, oh, like there's a kind of apology in it. I think it's also, I think you're right in that, like, the word monologue works as well. And, you know, I very much, because she's also performing herself, right? Like, like the whole book is her essentially performing within her own head, and the performance acts as a kind of distraction to something that she doesn't want to actually confront. And she's also her own kind of companion because she's not speaking up about something. And so it's definitely like a kind of, it's a spoken novel in that, like, you should hear it loud, and I there was never a point in the writing where I didn't hear it as I was writing it. Yeah, so it's that kind of, like, I guess it's a kind of theatrical performative novel, but I think it is a novel. But it's funny because I guess it's like half prose, isn't it? I mean, it's not always prose. Yeah.
That, but certainly compared to a conventional novel, it's doing a lot of stuff. But as I said, reading it flows. So that would.
Yeah, but I like the confusion about that, because I think it draws into question, like, how we expect to approach novels, and how, I don't know, like, the idea of having control over your own reading experience, because, like, in Little Scratch, you have to make decisions, or at least you believe that you have to make decisions. I do think that most people read it the same way, but you're still in some way making the decision to go that way. And so, like, that, I think that does add a kind of strange interaction, or a kind of challenge to inhabit the book in a way that is perhaps unfamiliar, and draws it away from the idea of the kind of traditional novel.
And you kind of touched on it there, Rebecca. It's very performative because she's performing for herself, and you're never quite sure. I mean, you're never quite sure if she's actually feeling the way she's feeling, or is she, is it all a performance? And the sort of doubleness, the themes there very early on. She kind of says something just in the opening couple of pages about can see her own face. She's watching herself from outside herself, and that sort of just that motif recurs, and again is literalized in the way that text, the forms the text takes on occasionally. That was a very I just found that a very ingenious way to embody that issue, rather than just again tell the reader about it. This doubleness. Was that something that was an easier, intuitive thing to write, or always seemed there, or did you feel like you had to pull that out of it, or what was?
Yeah, I think it came. I think it kind of initially that came from the fact that, so when I wrote the first thing of the novel, as I was saying about the lunch break stuff, what I realized very quickly, although this kernel was actually just me thinking about how my thought process worked and how would you write it on the page. What you realize is that as soon as you start writing thought, it's terrifying, because you're not meant to remember or have to process / reflect on your own thought patterns. That's meant to be something that's gone instantly, you're moving on to the next thing, and you're not meant to be aware of it. And so once you start fixing that stuff, there's a kind of intensity and a real neurosis to it. And so the way in which I found it was kind of leaning into the kind of trying to stylize, I guess, the kind of more natural kind of nuanced thought patterns, and thinking about how there is a kind of performance in the way that we think. And then that led me into thinking about the way in which performed thought can conceal. But it definitely was a thing that I was thinking about quite early on, because I think that I just find it, I think that we discussed the kind of unknowability of characters quite a lot, and that's a real interesting kind of thing to novelize, is the kind of ways in which dynamics often exist by people not being able to read the other person quite correctly. But I feel like there's not enough space for within those dynamics, the actual person who has no idea themselves about what they want or how they feel about something, those kind of indecisions, or even just the fact that thought is not really a fixed thing, and not really how much a thought's part of your identity. And so I kind of, I guess I was playing with, if I was going to write a day of every single thought that a person has, how much is that going to contradict, and it becomes a kind of it almost feels like you're writing flaws into the book, because she has to contradict herself, because if she was a kind of very fixed person, then it wouldn't be very genuine. But it was, I definitely started to play into it as I wrote.
Yeah, and it has to have the feel of a continuous improvisation, whereas a novel is not an improvised thing. It's a thing that takes a long time to put together. And yeah, and just when you were reading it there as well, I realized, and maybe it wasn't as apparent to me the first time around, but I was like, it's I don't know, the overriding tone for a novel that's about a lot of dark and turbulent stuff is kind of defiantly comic, I think, or a lot of it. Her voice, I really noticed that more the second time round, and even when it came to the most acutest points of psychological tension, I could just see, she would, as you said, it's all a masking and it's all an evasion, but she goes into a comic mode, and I don't know, could you talk a little about that? Because as I said, especially second time around, it hit me. It's a very light novel in some ways, given the heaviness of the themes.
Yeah, and I find it interesting that the comedy is often not the kind of thing that people talk about, because I think that's a kind of perhaps a discomfort, because the dominant subject of the book, or at least the kind of, I guess, the buzzword or whatever is trauma, or she's reckoning with an assault. And so how do you talk about a novel that is both dealing with a kind of sincere and serious thing, and also the fact that the voice is definitely meant to be funny.
Yeah.
And yeah, I don't know, and I felt like that was really really important to me, that it was funny. And I remember reading something. What was the book? Maybe it was Toni Morrison, but she said that that like there's something far more serious than like crying is laughter, like as in like there's something far more sincere about the act of laughing than any other way of expressing. And I thought that was really true. And it does feel like actually the way in which we meet the character of in Little Scratch is like in her most sincere form is through her interest in like voice and comedy. And actually, like, I feel like she gets closest to a kind of understanding of herself, or closest to an understanding of what she's going through in the comedy, or in the kind of circling around the thing via a kind of comic voice. Yeah, but I think I was also just kind of like quite tired by the fact that those two things don't often overlap, and I was kind of just like, why we're so used to kind of having very clear boundaries and lines and ways in which you talk about things, and then there's just a kind of like hush, or I don't know, it feels kind of inflexible. Yeah.
Because I mean, large sections of it are like basically an office comedy, and like there's a lot of literary, the drive-by and David Mitchell there, with these little bits, and there's a great bit later on where they're trying and failing to talk about how much they like leaving the Atocha station, and so yeah, it was just that sort of it. I think I went into it like expecting trauma, and kind of you got to be you're going to have to be somber about it. The text,
you're like
about it, and
okay.
so reading it, reading second time around, you're like, this is actually like, this is very funny and very light. So yeah, that was great. And I guess an aspect of what we touched on there as well is because as much as this novel is a language event, it's about what you're talking. We were in a narrator, we're in our head the whole time. She's performing for herself, and she's but like we are in our head the whole time. But another thing that struck me reading it was just how much of it is about the body and the non-linguistic and gesture and the proximity of other bodies to your body. I mean, her own alienation from her body, but also later on when she meets up with her boyfriend or partner, their constant intimacy and the little things they do, and the constant sort of like blending of their, they're buying, they go and they're just doing normal stuff. They're watching the poetry reading, and then they go get a beer, and they're sharing a dinner, and they cycle home together. But there's a lot of like little parallelisms where they're doing the same things, and like you draw attention to that. They're cycling home, and he indicates, right, she does the same thing, and that kind of she reaches a kind of like non-psychological, non-linguistic, non-mental. She reaches a kind of a physical comfort or reprieve with her boyfriend. There's like, it's a kind of intimate choreography they have. And again, your novel just really brought this. It's stuff that's often very just gestured at in novels, or not even like a lot of novels read like head in jar books. It's just a sense you're getting someone's thoughts and sensibility, not very much, of all the other ways people communicate and express themselves. And it just seemed to be a very important part, Little Scratch, for all its linguistic dexterity, that it just keeps touching and gesturing towards, and including the physical and the non.
Yeah. And it was kind of like at points it was kind of frustrating having to include it, because like the challenge was to kind of have to include everything. That was definitely kind of one of the main challenges of the book, was the fact that I couldn't skip anything. And so like which meant I didn't write chronologically, because otherwise I was just going to get bored very quickly. But it means that you have to be really aware of the character's body, because to make her move or get her anywhere or make her do anything. I have to think about what she's doing with her body. And so I think it was a really great writing exercise, even though it was difficult. But I think it's so true that, it was tied into my connection with the frustration about the way in which we write immediate present tense, which is often like not actually that accurate to how we experience immediacy and immediate present tense. And a lot of that is the body, right? We skipped so much stuff. That's why I got a poo scene in so quickly in the book, because I was just like,
poo scene in there.
Yeah, they gotta know what the reader's gotta know what's going on, and like that's gonna be happening. Yeah.
And yeah, so I mean, it. Do you like? I don't know what your next project is, and I'm not gonna pry, but like, do you think you will be continuing on in writing this way, or do you even know yet, or does it just depend on the project?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm working on my second novel at the moment, and it is very different. I think that like the form of this book is so much the character, to the point that I think I would be kind of ripping myself off if I try to use that form for not her. And so I don't know, for a while I was just like, I can't ever use that form again. Which is maybe a bit dramatic, but then I thought actually I would really like to revisit her in kind of 15 years when also when she is that much older and I am that much older, and I can kind of get into the head of her at that point in her life. But yeah, I guess because the form and the voice came simultaneously to me, that is so strongly that her head, the whole form of it. And so like I definitely, the way that I write is kind of instinctively formally strange, but that specific system of the page, yeah, not for a while.
But there will be some other formal.
Yeah. I kind of, and this one is the one I'm writing at the moment. I mean, the experience of writing, you may or may not understand this, maybe you're lucky, but the experience of writing my second novel compared to my first book is just completely different. And I feel like basically everything that I learned from writing Little Scratch is completely redundant, and if anything unhelpful, because you find yourself going into the space that you're in to write a different book, and the things that you learn that are helpful, yeah, actually kind of take you further away from the kind of ambition of the next project.
Yeah, you always got to start again. As DeLillo said, it's harder than major surgery, and it doesn't even save a life. Yeah, so I mean, we're just going back to Little Scratch for a moment. Yeah, I mean, I just want to go back to the format of it to me, because to me it's so. I mean, did you find that you were like reading it? I'm just like, I would just get lost in trying to do this. I would just get lost. A little bit what you're talking about, because theoretically, the form you kind of commit to, and you have to commit to something to get to the end of the novel, which is I'm going to tell. It's a day. It's literally a day. She wakes up, she goes to bed. It's the entire day. And you kind of touched on it there. You have to include the physical, and I think one thing you do that's great is just there's the repetition, which works to keep the flow going, which is when she's just brushing her hair or something, like literally just the text says brushing, and I found that actually that works to hold to focus your attention, and it's a bridge to move to the next thing, which is whatever's going on inside her head. I mean, did you get lost in it when you were writing it, or did you, maybe your brain works completely different how mine found it a breeze and could see the structure there the whole time?
Well, now I feel like I have to say I got lost, otherwise I'm in some way like being arrogant. No, I mean, I think, well, I think that the trick is that I knew I was writing a day, and my structure and essentially plot was already ready, because the plot of the day is the environment rather than, for me, the actual literally what she does second to second.
Yeah.
And I really kind of, I definitely kind of play to that ambiguity of not setting things too clearly, and kind of just having, I had various kind of tent pegs, you know, of obviously like she has to go to work, whatever, what she doesn't work between those hours, I can improvise, and then I have lunch break, and then I have the afternoon where I have to get her out of the office quickly, and then I have the evening. And then, you know, the form was actually something to keep me secure, because because I know the system so well, I really understood and was very you know, authoritarian about the system. I really, like, you know, I was like, there's only one place for a certain thing, this is where it goes. And I had that in my head. And then because of that, it was almost like everything, there was a kind of an amazing kind of innate planning or plotting without me having to do any work at all. Which, yeah, like basically made it a lot easier. And there was definitely a kind of refining of the system of the page, and definitely a kind of a rethinking. And there were points when I'd be like, I cannot remember at all what happens for the whole of the morning.
Oh, yeah.
And I'll have to, and it's just that kind of stuff. I basically find like the claustrophobia of like one document so difficult, because how are you meant to remember everything that happens from the beginning to the end of the novel? Like, that's meant to be a job, but it's physically impossible.
This isn't even broken up into chapters or sections.
Exactly.
It's all one thing. You start going, and I mean, it makes, as a reader, it makes you want to just, you're like, I've read 60 pages in 20 minutes because I just go with the momentum. I mean, was writing it like that, or, you know?
Yeah. I mean,
or did it just...
Writing was pretty quick. I wrote by hand, which actually saved some of that claustrophobia and some of the kind of, I guess it was harder to get lost because it was automatically not in order, because I was writing just randomly wherever I felt I wanted to write in the day. And so because of that, there was instantly kind of an abandon to it. And it was at points as I got her voice, and I guess from the pace, at quicker pace points, it was a very, very quick writing process. And then the kind of slower, more meditative, more kind of you know, reflective, scratching chin like things happen when I was writing up from my handwritten notes into like a document. And so that separation allowed a level of control or awareness. I think if I had been writing straight on my laptop, I would have just, for the whole
You're trying to do this on a laptop. Yeah, I just realized. So yeah, definitely handwritten there is definitely the winner. Just to let everyone know, we're probably going to go for maybe another 10 minutes. And if you want to ask a question, you can pop it into the Q&A there. We do have one. So please, anyone else, if you want to ask a question of Rebecca, please do. I'm just going to read this one. It's from Anonymous. Thanks for sharing details on other ongoing projects in addition to this novel. Would you say there's a kind of thematic unity in the projects you pursue, or is each one entirely new and unrelated? And you kind of have said you might revisit, but that implies you're not currently revisiting it, so you're not writing the sequel.
Yeah, not yet. Yeah, it's a good question. Although the one flaw of this question is that it actually asks me to pick apart my own flaws, because as soon as I admit the fact that I'm basically writing the same thing again but in a different character, then the whole kind of charade of writing something different falls apart. But yeah, so
that's how any writers do. You just write the same book.
But we're not meant to admit it.
That's what we do.
So I mean, I'm basically realizing that I'm my kind of, I guess my fixation is like is fixation. So a kind of like neuroticism or a kind of self-questioning. Basically this second novel, just to give a kind of brief like elevator pitch, that may be completely redundant in a year's time when I write something else and it's all in the bin. But it begins with the narrator, so it's told first person. That's the first unifying thing. I feel like I'm probably going to always write in first person. So the narrator's brother dies at the beginning of the book, and she has a very difficult relationship with her brother, and she hasn't spoken to him or seen him for years. And the death acts as a kind of unraveling, and so we follow her for like 5 days, within which she goes between thinking about like her past and like in present action. And the kind of recurring theme of both that and Little Scratch is a kind of a lack of control of their own head, so an inability to trust or form a kind of solid narrative. And it's that, I guess it's that question, that's my main question, is like the impossibility of really securing or having a narrative of your own life when memories are kind of fickle fuckers, and like your general like sense of yourself is completely subjective and impossible to like ever really understand or like know is true. And you can't trust anyone. So that is the kind of like general conceit that just keeps going. And yeah, I think it's just, that's probably just going to be how it is until someone tells me to stop doing
that. Yeah, and just to anyone watching wondering why I'm constantly shifting around my room, I'm running away from sunlight. Rebecca noticed it earlier, so at certain points I've been struck by sunlight and I'm trying to get it out of my eyes. I have a question here from Andy. He says, I found it hard not to, and he apologizes, compare Little Scratch to Claire Louise Bennett's Pond for the book, mostly because the experience is so extremely subjective, and also with Sue Rainsford's Follow Me to Ground, great book too. Both of these writers reflect art forms and works, performance as well as representative art, and I believe you, Rebecca, have an interest in the art world. So how conscious was the artistic influence? Does it reflect any specific art forms or works?
Another good question. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a very visual book, and I think that like I definitely have quite a visual mind, and that is my kind of way of thinking or perceiving things. There aren't kind of explicit artistic connections that I can make, and I'd like to disclaim that although I'm technically an arts editor, my knowledge is really not very impressive. I'm into it, but I'm not an expert. So yeah, but I do have that kind of interest. I think actually, to be honest, which definitely connects to Claire Louise Bennett, who is studied drama and stuff like that. I do think the kind of the theatre background is a big thing. I mean everyone does, but when I was a kid I wanted to be an actor and was really interested in like writing monologues and that kind of stuff. I read loads of plays, and so there's definitely a kind of a theatrical inspiration or kind of grounding. And I remember reading like Stanislavski, who's a kind of he's a theatre practitioner who basically writes a lot of stuff about the kind of getting as close to kind of naturalistic, well, it's naturalism, so it's as close as possible to kind of sincere action and thought and stuff, and in the way you convey a body. And so that stuff's definitely bubbling up and is coming up through Little Scratch. And yeah, I think Claire Louise Bennett is a really good, well, I mean, a comparison I would love to be made. And I think that she's a brilliant writer, and yeah, you can see her subjectivity and her theatre in her work for sure.
And was there, I mean, this is again, I was drawing blank when someone asked me, was there other writers who influenced it? Just your method in general.
Yeah, that, I guess, like not formally. I always struggle to answer when people ask for kind of formal comparisons. But there are kind of three writers that I've kind of more and more begun to like connect to the book. And it's funny because I wasn't thinking about them at the time, and now I'm just like, duh, like you were obviously thinking about them. At the time, like if you think about them too much, then you start copying them. So it's probably my mind just being like, push them away for now, so you think you're doing something. But yeah, so like, I mean, Sarah Kane, the playwright, who writes these like amazing plays, very very intense, very violent. Her use of language is just like next level, and her kind of general like atmosphere and tone is just really, really good. And I kind of read her collected plays every summer, just to kind of counter the summer reads vibe, because they're just like deeply dark and depressing, and like quite a few suicides and deaths feature in most of them. But yeah, she's just like just amazing, and is someone that you can read as happily on the page as C, if not happier on the page. So yeah, definitely her. And then the other one that I've begun to notice, although I don't think anyone else would kind of recognize the connection in any way, but the Spanish novelist Javier Marias, who I just remember thinking about him when I started writing Little Scratch, because I was kind of reading him at the same time, and the way in which he basically like gets the reader in a situation and then just digresses them for pages away and way away from where they are, and then brings them right back again. And the kind of control and movement of his prose, his ability to basically be like, hey reader, here you are, now trust me, I'll bring you back. I think that kind of gave me a level of kind of permission, or just ability just to carry on. Yeah, and then I guess the last one is Virginia Woolf, which is probably a kind of more obvious inspiration, because I was reading her from, I guess, like kind of late teens, and then I was just like obviously mind blown and kind of amazed by her ability, like formally, linguistically, everything. And so she was she just like moved like the fence post. You're like, wait, you can go there. And so again, like she's there, and like I kind of like didn't think she was, and then I remembered that I like wrote a dissertation on like her use of the everyday. I was just like, this is so obvious. You're literally thinking about her when you're writing this book. But anyway, suppressed it.
Yeah. I like that. You can do a post-mortem on your work and be like, oh yeah, that was those bits. But at the time, you're just capable of like prodigious amounts of repression, and you're like, I'm doing my own thing here.
I'm a genius.
Yeah. I just have one last question. It's kind of what we touched on before, but I'll just it was asked here. I guess you can elaborate what you said. I'm curious how you found form and voice for this project. Was it intuitive, experimental, or actively thought and decided on? So I guess you did tell us, Rebecca, that from the start, kind of the voice in this form was there. But did you have to experiment to refine it, or is it?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't experiment by writing, because everything that I wrote went into the book. But I did experiment in like thinking. Like I would have her voice like quite loud in my head, and I would kind of, the way in which I kind of developed her was basically going into environments that I wanted her to be in, and then like basically giving her the lens and just being like, hey, how would you look at this? And so a bit of that, but also like, I guess because she has a kind of very rhythmic, very quick paced voice, I think once you kind of, it was almost like once I started thinking as her, it was actually quite hard to stop. And so it was kind of actually like less, how do I get into this voice, and more like, how do I get rid of her? Which I think was why it was like quite a quick writing process generally, because it was kind of just like, if I don't get this done, she is going to send me insane.
You had to do a kind of an exorcism on yourself.
Yeah.
Well, that was it was well worth it. And if anyone hasn't read Little Scratch yet, it's just out now in paperback in the US, Rebecca.
Yeah, exactly.
And you can grab it if you're in Lakeview in Chicago, you can grab it at Unabridged Bookstore, and otherwise you can grab it wherever, not off the Spaceman, off other people. And I think that's it really for tonight. So thanks everyone for joining us, and Rebecca, thanks for staying up late in the UK and chatting to us here.
Thanks for chatting with me.
On the North American continent. It was a delight, and the book is amazing. So best of luck with the next one.
Thank you.
And I guess that's it. So I don't know if our MC is going to come back in. This is the part of the Zoom where everyone sits around.
Just taking a minute to get back on screen here. Yes, thank you both so much for joining us virtually. I know at this point Zoom meetings are kind of hard to continue doing, but we're grateful that you decided to do this with us. Thank you everybody for joining us tonight. And like they said, check out Little Scratch. We've got copies available now. It's a great book. We're so grateful that you guys joined us. Everybody have a good night.
Thanks so much, guys.
Thanks, everyone.